Guys, you know what business is? And I'm not talking about just taking a product to the market and making sure you sell it and that your profits exceed your expenditures. Like, that is very important, and that is how you stay in business. That wouldn't go with the definition. A very large part of it is preserving information. That's why what people will use, people that don't have checkbooks and accounts and employees and retail commercial spaces, they will use the term, it's none of your business. It could be a private matter. But that expression is very fair. I have information. It is my information. If you work at this organization, I'm even going to assign you not only to non-competes, to non-disclosure, so that when you leave here, you don't give away something proprietary. It's a massively important element. And I don't know if there's anything in the world that operates the way that you think it works. Now, hold on, I'm not condescending to you. Think of what business you're in. And whether you're the owner or whether you're the employee, but think of what business you're in. There are things within that business that you don't tell anybody. And you don't tell anybody because it's protected and it's what keeps the business afloat. And you understand that not everybody understands that. And if they did hear it, maybe they wouldn't like it, but it's fair and it's the way it's done. The system predates you. It's one of these situations, but what you always then fail to do is to understand there's nothing in your life that isn't perfectly normal. You just think that you have things that aren't normal. So if you have proprietary secrets within your business, and of course you do, it's foolish to think the guy next to you doesn't. Give me a topic. It could be any topic. Cars. All right, Ethan here says cars. How do car lots make their most money, guys? How do they do it? And you know, you've seen it. It's obvious. They sell a car. What they paid for it versus what they sell it for, that margin, even after commissions and everything, that is how they make their profit. Wrong. You're not even remotely close. The number one way a car business makes money is the service department. Okay, great. What's number two? Well, selling a car. No, it's not. It's extended warranties. Well, what's the number three way that they make it? Number three way they make it is buying your trade. What's number four? Four is the one that you thought was number one, selling the car. I only share that for you because that's in front of everybody. One of the great things about MMA that I've always appreciated, and I'm never going to hand you the answers. I'm just not. It's a closed mouth business. But if you follow the history of it and you find out, it's more interesting, not the business of it, because it's very hard to succeed. Even if you know the elements that you need in place, it's a very difficult thing to do. But the history of how nobody knows it or even pursues it, or how some guy jumps in it and all of a sudden he's out. Not only is he out and he lost all his money and it didn't succeed, he doesn't even know why he's out. He doesn't even know why other people made it and he doesn't. And I think that that's very interesting. I think that you would find that interesting. From day one, promoters would go to a press conference. They would tell you the attendance and the live gate. And you never knew why they're doing that. Are they bragging? Are they boasting? Are they smearing in our face? To tell the fans the live gate you did and then say it's a record, you just told us, the fans, that you got us to pay more than you did somebody else. Why'd you do that to us, right? What is the benefit to that? What if you have an off night? You want that in front of the world? Two reasons, guys. First off, it's regulated by the government, which means those numbers cannot stay private. They just can't. One phone call, they must tell you. So you might as well get in front of it and tell them yourself. But secondly, since that's the way it's been done, there is a perception amongst the world, yourself included, that that is how the promotion is going to make money. Then if they have a distribution partner, as rare as that might be, you're going to have rumors that seep out onto the internet about what it did. So now you've really got the smart marks, right? I mean, you refuse to tell them your pay-per-view numbers. You will even say that I will never reveal our pay-per-view numbers. That is private and secret, but it comes out on the internet the next day. So you feint that you're protecting that because you're feinting something different. You're telling the people that are watching, your fellow competitors, your future competitors, the guy with a dream and a couple of bucks in the bank, you're telling them that I protect that and that's secret to draw the conclusion within their mind that that's how you make your money. So now you've got the live gate that you told them, And you've got the pay-per-view that you would not reveal to them. It's so important. All right, great. Anybody paying attention's got it all figured out. You got a live gate, you got a pay-per-view. No, not even remotely close. Which is why, and I'll just use the UFC as an example, it's now a public company and must report their numbers, had their best years during a pandemic where there was no audience whatsoever. None. And you still have people that can't connect these kinds of dots. Now, I'm sharing these things for you because there has always been a big bad wolf, right? There's always been a wolf in the hen house, and that wolf is the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And I saw as recently as today a comment made by Dan Hardy. Now, in full disclosure, you guys have been friends with Dan for 10 years. I like listening to Dan. I like Dan. So if you hear positivity from my tone, full disclosure, right? But he made a comment that Dana White will do everything within his power to stop other fighters from doing what Francis did. And that comment surprised me for a couple of reasons, but none of which are more than a misunderstanding of what was just done. And while I say that the UFC comes off as the wolf in the hen house, there's no other promoter that would not release their exclusive talent. Nobody would do that. Some contracts have what's called a loan-out clause. So if you see an athlete competing somewhere, just by example, that you believe is under exclusive contract somewhere else, it means they got bought out. For one, okay, there was no favors, there was nothing nice done. But secondly, the reason other promotions don't have the resistance is nobody's asked. They don't possess yet, at this point, some people say the sport's within its infancy. Not really a term that I like, but I'll just share with you, there hasn't been anybody on a different card that was wanted somewhere else. It was only coming from the UFC. So when the UFC said no, that's the same answer that they all would have said. The others just haven't yet been asked. Now, I want to take a look at what Dan said because there is a couple of problems. I'm very big on the story must be told the way that it happened. It must. And we can have our fun and we can even do our trolling. When we're telling a story that could be viewed down the line and used as a piece of history, it's extremely important that we tell it right. There's a massive misunderstanding, and there's even a topic and a meme going around, laughing at the people that said that Francis fumbled the bag. They've got two different conversations here. If you're talking about from a competitive standpoint, I wanted to do something. This was my drive. This was my dream. This was my opportunity. I wanted to go. I wanted to compete. I thought I could beat Fury. I wanted to show myself. I wanted to, for my family, for my dreams, whatever it might have been. If it's from the competitive standpoint, Francis took a massive risk and got it. And he got to do the competition. And that right there would be the win. Right there. If we're talking competition, being able to do the competition would be the win. This is all cherry and sprinkles and nice icing on top of the cake when it comes down to how well he did within the competition. But that is already, right, we're 2 days removed and that has already been mistaken for this was the appropriate and better financial move. That is a very bizarre statement. There is a rumor that we all believe to be true that Francis was given $10 million for this fight. Now, I believe Francis versus Jon Jones. I don't know that it would have got him 10, but it would have got him pretty close. And then Francis and the trilogy with Stipe and whatever would have come, whatever could have won, which we really don't know beyond those two fights. We know that Stipe and Jones or Jones and Stipe. We know those were going to be Francis's next two fights. But guys, I must remind you, it's been 2 years. Right? In February, it will have been 2 years. So, a year and 9 months. That, on average, would take you to 5 fights. Now, I fully admit you have to do more work, but I'm just talking about today. Today, right now, go and do the $110 million fight, or today, right now, how much money is sitting in your account, purely from purses, had you done the 4 to 5 MMA fights, and you would have it wrong. And this isn't a topic that I want to begrudge. I realize these aren't apples to apples, but you're the one trying to make it as though more money was done here than would have been done, right? And I'm just correcting you that it's not right. Moreover, and the much larger point, we don't know how this pay-per-view did. This turned out to be something special and wonderful, for sure. But we don't know how the pay-per-view did. And frankly, you'll never know. You will never be told. There'll be rumors that come out, but they will not come from an executive of a publicly traded company who are the only ones that hosted this, whether that's the Walt Disney Company or whether that was another subscriber that you were able to find. You will never find from Time Warner, DirecTV, you will never find. All of boxing, the biggest fight ever. Well, the biggest fight ever came through a press release written in the media, not even by somebody that showed their face. But it was never told and never confirmed by an executive who has SEC rules over the top of them. So when I tell you you'll never know what the pay-per-view, you won't. But it's very difficult to imagine that it came remotely close to breaking even. I mean, even remotely close. There was not a buzz going into the fight. The buzz coming out of the fight is unlike anything I've experienced in sport. I was told about something called a Miracle on Ice. I believe it was in like 84, 85, 86. It was a meaningful amount of time ago. And that was before closed circuit was even a thing. That was before digital was even a term. Like box office and finances were very different at that time. And as much as I hear about a Miracle on Ice, they've never replayed it on television. I've never seen it. Just by example. And the point that I'm hoping to make that you should be able to follow here. The hype and buzz that you come out of for a match that turned out to be wonderful, a competition of any kind that turned out to be an absolute treat. You got something you never expected. Has nothing to do with revenue. It's already done at that point. There's a lot of things from history that you'll use as your trajectory to the future. But you could go through history any way you wanted to. They've done motorcycle, and they've done music concerts, and they've done pro wrestling. They've done all sorts of fights on pay-per-view, but you can keep going. Anything that's ever been on pay-per-view, go right ahead and find anything that was the good, the big. And you got to have good and you got to have big. For these kinds of purses, you got to have good, you have to have big. See, that's your own point. Your own point that you then are failing to realize he can make more money. He can make 5 times more money in boxing. I'm not telling you you're wrong. But let's take what you just said. So the purses and the expenses of boxing are now 5 times more. So just to break even or to have a nice little profit, you got to do 5 times what MMA would have done. That's according to you, by your numbers and math and your own deductions. And if you were to follow any pay-per-views from the beginning of time, you will not find any pay-per-view that is on a top 25 that was on at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, known as 2 o'clock Eastern. So I'm only suggesting for you before, right, it was an interesting comment, and Dan Hardy isn't the only one to make or insinuate that this is the hottest commodity in sports. He's not the only one. But there's a number of promoters out there, and they haven't jumped forward. There's a reason, right? You were all told McGregor and Mayweather was the biggest and most successful fight of all time. Both of those guys campaigned and lobbied for a rematch. And rematching the two of them, like think about how much you want to see Fury versus Tyson, where we have very short-term memories. But think about how much you want to see Fury versus Tyson. And you want to see it because now you know Francis can win. Now you know it's going to be competitive. All the things you thought were impossible, you now know are true. Guys, that's exactly what Mayweather-McGregor was. That was supposed to be over in 3 minutes. The over-under was 3 rounds, 9 minutes, but that constitutes 3 rounds. Them boys was out there a half of an hour with Conor taking rounds all over the place. I'm only sharing for you, as much as you would like to see Fury and a guy you just think that's a slam dunk, was the exact same thing with Conor versus Floyd, and both of them were willing. Fury has not shown any interest that he's willing, because he's already got a contract signed. His next piece of business is with Usyk. You got to be careful what you let in your bubble. You get put down by an amateur, or at least a guy with an amateur record, right? 0-0 is an amateur record. You get put down by a guy like that. You got to be real careful what you let. You got to put that behind you, and you got to move forward. So I'm just sharing with you, there's no interest right now by Fury to do a rematch. And think about how bad you want to see it. Conor and Floyd did everything they could to partner back up, but they didn't put them together. Why? Why? Rematches historically. Now you got the B-roll. Now you got the footage. Now you don't have to tell a story and make believe land and break down a bunch of footage and show where Conor's a southpaw and Sab Judah hit Floyd awfully clean and he was standing southpaw. You don't have to do those things. We now know it, right? Everything would be there for the rematch. They didn't do the rematch. Why? Because it wasn't even close to a break even. Not even close to break even. Somebody got their ass kicked on it. They didn't want to do it again, but it's important that you do understand that. I don't suggest for you that that's what Francie and Fury would do. I'm just suggesting for you and attempting to remind for you when we're talking about a bag, and that bag that was fumbled is supposed to be a bag full of money. You have the foggiest idea what the money on this was. You don't have the foggiest idea. So now when you're coming out the backside, I read a piece from a lawyer on Twitter, and I even DM'd him and wrote him. I said, hey, you're a lawyer. You've got a responsibility. If you're advertising, as a lawyer, you have a responsibility to say things that are accurate. You're just out here saying things. And the comment that made me say that is he wrote, Francis Ngannou is now the most sought-after athlete in combat sports. And he went on to make his point. He somehow tied this into the UFC and an antitrust. I'm just going, my goodness, where did you get that theory? So when I tell you that, you must understand, Francis is under contract with the PFL. Don Davis went out, he did Ariel's show yesterday. And Don Davis made it very clear there's nobody interesting right now for Francis to fight in MMA. I love that Don said that because that was the truth. And if he tried to feed us anything else, it would have hurt and cost credibility. I wouldn't be talking about it right now. But he didn't do that. He went on and he told the truth. Now, simultaneously, there's a conversation that Francis created, also on Ariel Helwani's show. And Francis said, Deontay Wilder has been training MMA for a couple of months now. We're in discussions to have me and Wilder fight in MMA. And this is where the big miss comes, right? There's a reason they're going to do Fury and Usyk. There's a reason the conversation of Francis versus Fury, again, which we all know to be the absolute biggest, like nothing is going to beat that fight. Nobody would even pretend. No, that's the fight. And they're not even willing to do that again because the numbers didn't pencil. So now you're going to take Deontay Wilder, you're going to bring him over to MMA. Like, this is the conversation, but this is also the miss. And make no mistake that Francis and Fury was good business. In terms of interest and revenue, the revenue was just far lighter than the expenditure. So it's not a viable business. Same would be said for Mayweather and McGregor. Like, make no mistake, people tuned in, people paid attention and watched it, just not enough to cover the spread. So if we're admitting that Francis and Tyson is the biggest, and they're not talking about doing that, we have seen 2 times, both with Conor versus Floyd, both with Francis versus Fury, where we ended up with a special sporting spectacle. But we haven't seen it in reverse, and they've tried. James Toney versus Randy Couture, right? Bringing a boxer and putting him in MMA. James Toney versus Randy Couture was not a record setting of any kind. It was an interesting match and it needed to be done, but as soon as we saw, we remembered we kind of settled this in 1993. That was tried again with Clarissa Shields. She's just fantastic and a 2-time world champion, but a true world champion, right? Amateur. Olympic Games, architecture, proves she's the best on earth, and she proved it twice. Her numbers did not do anything remarkable. We just haven't seen it succeed to bring boxers to MMA. If we're gonna do Francis and Deontay, which is a match I love. I called for that. I even called for that before Francis went on a call for it. I love that match. Not to mention it's possible. Not to mention Deontay played the same game with the boxing world as Francis played with the MMA world to make himself available. Like, this is a very doable thing, but we got to do it in boxing. We have to do it in boxing. And to come out and try to tell a story that Deontay Wilder's actually been training MMA for 2 months, I mean, this is a tough sell. He did? Really? Where? One of the top boxers in the world is doing MMA because he's thinking of pursuing it, and no trainer has come out to take credit for him working with him. No teammates have come out to say, hey, I'm seeing him in the gym. He sure is working hard. Nobody's taking photos to advertise to get people to come and sign up for their gym. Come on, man, this is silly. Of course he's not doing those things, but he doesn't need to. He's never proven or demonstrated that he can come and do MMA, but Francis sure has proven and demonstrated he could go over to boxing. And see, this is where the miss always comes. The miss comes as though you're holding somebody back or you're stopping them from doing it. You have to have the right match. You got to have it at the right time. And Fury Francis wasn't it. It was from a competitive standpoint. But competitiveness is done after the money comes in. The only thing that keeps the lights on, if you had to put it in one word, the only thing is anticipation. It was not an anticipated match. So I'm bringing this to you because when I'm seeing this dialogue, right, the WBC, and this is so disappointing, and in all fairness, it could be the WBO. I believe it's the WBC. But their president has come out and said, Francis is now going to be a top 10 ranked boxer. Well, that's a very reckless and irresponsible statement. It sounds right. It sounds right from what we saw that he would be a top 10 guy in the world. That does sound right. Who are you going to take off the top 10? Which one of those guys in the top 10 who have all had well over 100 fights with an overwhelming 90+% victory rate, and of course I'm including their amateurs careers too, who amongst them comes off the list for a guy who is 0-1? Your professional boxing record is better than Francis's. You're 0-0. So who are you going to take off the list to put Francis on? Who is it you're going to disrespect? Who's 100 matches with 90+ success? Who are you going to replace to pull him off? And I'm only sharing with you what a disappointment that is. What a disappointment that is, that that conversation would even be made by a president of a governing body. The matchup's important. How you're going to do it is important. The story is important. And to think that you can just interchangeably take an athlete who did well. I mean, this has been tested at every level, including taking two athletes who had already done it not once but twice. It was called Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Part 3. Not only did they break 1 million pay-per-view, which is a grand slam. I know the things you read on the internet, they're all garbage. If you actually are a promoter that can do 7 figures in pay-per-view, when you walk onto campus at DirecTV, they will have red carpet rolled out for you. They will be standing aside. It's just such a rarity. Those guys did it twice. So now we took the same guys doing the same thing, but we put it in a different organization. People weren't familiar with it. They weren't sure how to buy it. They weren't sure what day or what time it was on. And like all pay-per-views, of course it bombed. Of course it did. It's an education process. It's not about the athletes or what they're doing. There's a number of other factors that go into it. I'm only sharing that with you. Like this idea that somebody's so heavily sought after, well, then book him. Why don't you book him? Right? It's always the myth. Like boxing is a really hard world to get into and you got to break in. Not when you have 2 free agents, and you do. Deontay's free. Francis is free. Go book him. Do you see the difference? Do you see where all of a sudden it isn't a big bad wolf in the hen house? Do you see where if you invest in somebody and you build them up and you tell a story, that you would then like to get that money back plus a profit? That's what the business is. But do you understand where that's also appropriate? I think the PFL's in a very good spot. The way Francis's contract reads, he needs to return to them, and it needs to be for MMA, but I think they could have a conversation to make that boxing. Sure, they could. But as far as doing the Wilder fight and doing that in MMA, that's just weird. And you also have a buyout clause. I thought Don Davis coming out saying, look, there's not really interesting things for Francis right now in MMA. I just thought that was a really honest assessment. And I appreciate it a lot. Francis had come out, and he called out both Stipe and Jon Jones. In fact, he called out Jon Jones, said, I'll fight Stipe as Jon Jones is getting better. Like, I do appreciate that attitude. I think it's a really wonderful thing from a competitive standpoint, but there was an ability to do that last year. There was an ability. Both guys were under contract. There was an ability to do it. Jon was announced when he returns, he will fight for the title. Stipe was the champion, not Francis. Francis just happened to become the champion. Like, everything fell together. This was a slam dunk. It was a no-brainer. Neither one of those guys did anything to make that fight happen. That's the truth. That's the way that happened. They both found their balls after it was impossible. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. Before you come out and tell me how big and huge something was, you have no idea what the gate was. You have no idea if tickets were even sold or if they were given away. You never went online and looked. You don't know. And you don't have any rumors of pay-per-view reports. None. They haven't come out yet. They will. But you have a hard time remembering where you stood on Friday of last week, where you stood when you woke up Saturday morning. You have a hard time remembering that you didn't have a huge anticipation. You didn't have a party to go to, like most fight nights. You didn't have people coming over and a bunch of people's pizzas being delivered at 11 a.m. Pacific time. No, you did not. That's not true. And it's a very interesting spot. And if you're going to look at it and tell it for what it is from a competitive standpoint, this was awesome. This was an absolute treat. The winners here were us. The winners here were the fighters that went out and got an exorbitant amount of money. The losers are the people that wrote the check. They did not cover the spread. So talking about somebody's sought after or somebody's won or somebody's needed or whatever they do next is going to be this huge thing. Let's even rank a guy in the top 10 that's never won a match. Like when you get done with all this silliness and you get done talking, you're going to have to ask yourself one question. Why didn't you do it? And there is an answer. You're not sure of any of those things, and nothing's a guarantee. You don't know who the opponent's going to be, and you're not going to know if they're going to pull it off. And quite frankly, it turned out it wasn't all that sought after. One specific match turned out to be something very, very special. But much like the Miracle on Ice, it was promoted and hyped and talked about and loved and revered after business was done.